You don't belong in first class, so stand up before I make this difficult." Officer Ryan Caldwell's voice cut through the quiet cabin just as the last passengers were settling into their seats. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Danielle Carter looked up from the safety card resting in her lap and met the officer's stare without flinching. She wore a charcoal coat, simple pearl earrings, and shoes that showed the faint wear of too many airport terminals. Nothing about her appearance matched the picture Caldwell had already formed in his mind, and that was exactly the problem. "This is my seat," Danielle said, holding out her boarding pass. Caldwell barely glanced at it. Behind him, a white man in a navy blazer leaned into the aisle with an irritated expression. "I told the flight attendant she was acting suspicious," he said. "She kept looking around like she owned the place." Danielle's eyes moved from the passenger to the officer, then toward the small security camera mounted above the forward galley. She knew its angle. She knew how long the footage was stored. She knew which department reviewed complaints involving airport police. Caldwell mistook her silence for fear. "Last chance," he said. "Move to the back, and we can forget this happened." A few passengers lowered their eyes. Others raised their phones, unsure whether they were recording a misunderstanding or the beginning of something much worse. Danielle remained seated. "Check the name on the manifest," she said. Her voice was steady, but a pulse beat hard beneath her jaw. Caldwell exhaled sharply and reached for the boarding pass. Instead of reading it, he let it fall onto the carpet. The paper landed face up beside Danielle's shoe. "Seat 2A. Danielle Carter." "Confirmed." "Anyone can print a ticket," he said. "You people always think confidence is proof." The words settled over the cabin like cold dust. Danielle felt every eye on her, yet the deepest sting came from the flight crew's silence. Evelyn Brooks, the senior attendant, stood near the galley curtain with one hand gripping the service counter. She had worked for the airline for 11 years. She knew the proper procedure. She also knew Caldwell's reputation. Danielle bent down, picked up the boarding pass, and smoothed the crease with her thumb. "Officer," she said quietly, "do not confuse my patience with permission." Caldwell's face tightened. The cabin lights reflected off the badge clipped to his uniform, turning it into a small, hard flash of silver. Then he stepped closer, lifted his hand in a sudden gesture of intimidation, and struck the side of Danielle's face. No one moved. A child 3 rows back stopped whispering. Somewhere near the rear of the aircraft, an overhead bin clicked shut. Danielle remained still for one long second, her breathing slow, her eyes fixed not on Caldwell, but on the camera above him. When she finally turned back, there was no panic in her expression. Only recognition. She had boarded this flight to investigate complaints of discrimination. Now the truth had found her seat before the plane ever left the gate. Danielle did not touch her face. She let the silence remain exactly where it had fallen, heavy and undeniable, while Officer Caldwell stood over her as though authority alone could rewrite what everyone had witnessed. Her boarding pass rested between 2 fingers. Seat 2A. Confirmed. The cabin air felt colder now, sharpened by the hum of the ventilation system and the quiet glow of phones held at chest level. Evelyn Brooks took one step forward, then stopped. Her eyes moved from Danielle to Caldwell, and Danielle saw the conflict there clearly. Fear had a posture. It tightened shoulders. It lowered voices. It made good people wait for someone else to act first. Danielle knew that posture because she had seen it in employee reports for months. Passengers questioned more aggressively because of their skin. Families separated without explanation. Complaints dismissed as confusion. Each report had been softened by corporate language until prejudice looked like a customer service mistake. That was why she had boarded under her maiden name, Danielle Carter, without an assistant, without executive priority, and without the private welcome usually arranged for the woman who had built Aurora Atlantic Airways from a struggling regional carrier into a national company. She wanted to know how the airline treated people when no one important appeared to be watching. Now she knew. Caldwell reached toward her arm, but Danielle raised one open hand. "Do not touch me again," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to listen. He gave a humorless smile. "You are delaying a commercial flight." "The aircraft door is still open," Danielle replied. "The jet bridge is connected, and ground operations have not released the plane. Caldwell blinked. It was only a fraction of a second, but she noticed. Most passengers would not know that detail. Most passengers would not glance toward the forward panel and recognize the status lights reflected in the galley window. Evelyn noticed too. "How do you know that?" she asked before she could stop herself. Danielle looked at her, not with anger, but with disappointment that felt worse. "Because procedures matter most when they are inconvenient." The words landed softly. Evelyn's grip loosened on the counter. Caldwell looked toward the white passenger in the navy blazer. "Tell me exactly what she did." The man shifted in his seat. His confidence had begun to thin under the attention of the cabin. "She was looking around," he said. "She asked the attendant about the departure delay. She seemed demanding." Danielle turned toward him. "I asked why a maintenance warning had been cleared without a second verbal confirmation from the cockpit." The man frowned. "See? That is what I mean. Regular passengers do not talk like that." A low murmur passed through the first-class cabin. Danielle almost smiled, but there was no humor in the moment. She had spent 23 years learning every layer of aviation operations, from baggage routing to fleet financing. Her mother, Lillian Carter, had once been removed from a business-class seat because an employee insisted her ticket could not possibly be valid. Lillian had stood at the gate holding a torn boarding pass while strangers watched and did nothing. Danielle had been 15 years old. She remembered the fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, and the way her mother kept apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. Years later, when Danielle founded Aurora Atlantic, she wrote the company's first service principle herself. "Dignity is not earned at the gate. It arrives with the passenger." She had believed the sentence was enough. Sitting in seat 2A, she understood that words on a training wall meant nothing unless someone was willing to defend them. Caldwell reached for the radio on his shoulder. "I am calling additional officers." Danielle looked once more at the camera above the galley. "Before you do," she said, "you should ask Ms. Brooks to preserve the cabin footage." Evelyn went pale. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" Danielle folded her boarding pass along its original crease and placed it carefully on the armrest. "Someone giving you one final chance to check the facts before you make this worse." Caldwell did not answer her question. Instead, he pressed the button on his shoulder radio and requested 2 additional officers at Gate 18, describing Danielle as uncooperative before anyone had verified a single fact. His voice was practiced, almost calm, and that calmness made the accusation feel more dangerous. It turned assumption into procedure. It gave fear a uniform. Danielle watched Evelyn lower her eyes toward the floor, and in that brief movement, another piece of the situation became clear. Caldwell had done this before. Not exactly this, perhaps, but enough that the crew recognized the pattern and knew the safest response was silence. He was not merely confident. He was comfortable. For 8 years, Ryan Caldwell had worked airport security details across the terminal, building a reputation for handling difficult passengers quickly. Supervisors praised his decisiveness. Gate agents called him when they wanted a problem removed before boarding delays reached management. He understood the value of speed in an airport, where every minute had a price and every complaint could be buried beneath the next departure. What he did not understand was the difference between control and judgment. To Caldwell, hesitation looked like weakness, questions sounded like defiance, and a black woman sitting calmly in first class became suspicious the moment someone suggested she did not belong there. Grant Hollis, the passenger in the navy blazer, shifted deeper into his seat. He had expected validation, not scrutiny. He had noticed Danielle when she boarded because she had asked Evelyn about the maintenance delay in a tone that sounded informed. That bothered him. He had spent years assuming confidence belonged naturally to men who dressed like him, spoke like him, and occupied expensive spaces without explanation. Danielle had disturbed that order simply by knowing too much. She was watching the crew, Grant added, trying to strengthen his story. She kept checking the front galley and asking technical questions. Caldwell nodded as though the statement confirmed something serious. Danielle turned toward him. "What exactly did you believe I was going to do?" Grant opened his mouth, but no answer came. The question exposed the emptiness beneath his concern. He had not seen a threat. He had felt discomfort and given it a respectable name. Caldwell stepped into the silence. You do not question another passenger during an investigation. Danielle looked back at him. This is not an investigation. You decided what happened before you asked what happened. A woman across the aisle slowly lowered her phone. Her expression had changed from curiosity to shame. Farther back, a businessman who had avoided looking at Danielle finally spoke. Officer, her boarding pass is valid. I saw it. Caldwell turned sharply. Stay out of this. The men hesitated, then continued. She did not cause a disturbance. The disturbance started when you arrived. A second voice followed from behind him. Then another. The cabin did not erupt. It shifted. Quietly. Carefully. People began offering fragments of truth they had possessed from the beginning. Evelyn swallowed and looked toward the camera above the galley. The system records continuously while the aircraft is at the gate, she said. Caldwell stared at her. Are you certain you want to involve yourself? The threat was subtle, but everyone heard it. Evelyn's face tightened. Danielle recognized the moment. This was how silence survived. Not through loud commands, but through small warnings about careers, schedules, and consequences. Caldwell removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt and held them where Danielle could see them. Stand up. Danielle remained seated. Her pulse was steady now. On what grounds? Failure to comply with an unlawful order. Caldwell stepped closer. You are making a mistake. Danielle looked at the silver badge, then at the frightened attendant, then at the passengers who were finally beginning to speak. No, Officer Caldwell, she said. I am giving you the opportunity to stop making yours. Before he could respond, a strained sound came from the row behind her. An elderly man had slumped sideways in his seat, one hand pressed weakly against his chest. His wife called his name once, then again, louder. The cabin changed instantly. Caldwell turned. Evelyn froze. Danielle was already on her feet. Danielle reached the elderly man before anyone else moved. His name was Harold Benton, according to the tag on the leather briefcase beneath his seat, but in that moment he was simply a frightened human being struggling to stay conscious. His wife, Margaret, gripped his shoulder and repeated his name with a voice that grew thinner each time. Danielle lowered herself beside him and spoke calmly. Harold, look at me. Can you hear me? His eyes opened for a second, then drifted. Danielle placed 2 fingers against his neck, watching his chest, counting silently. The cabin seemed to shrink around her. Phones lowered. The murmur vanished. Even Caldwell stood still, his hand still near the handcuffs at his belt, as if the emergency had interrupted a story he believed he controlled. Evelyn, bring the medical kit and the automated external defibrillator, Danielle said. Evelyn did not hesitate this time. She turned and moved quickly toward the galley. Call the cockpit and tell them we have a medical emergency at the gate. Request paramedics and keep the jet bridge connected. The younger flight attendant near the forward door stared at Danielle for half a second, then obeyed. Margaret, I need you to tell me whether he has a heart condition. Margaret nodded rapidly. He had a procedure last year. He takes medication. He said he felt pressure before we boarded, but he did not want to miss the flight. Danielle's expression softened, but her voice remained precise. You did the right thing by speaking now. Harold's breathing became shallow. Danielle loosened the collar of his shirt and asked the nearest passenger to move the armrest and clear the aisle. Grant Hollis remained frozen in his seat, his face drained of the confidence he had carried only minutes earlier. Danielle looked directly at him. Sir, move your bag and give us space. He obeyed without argument. Evelyn returned with the medical equipment, breathing hard. Danielle opened the kit and scanned its contents with practiced familiarity. Years earlier, after losing her father during a flight when confusion had cost precious minutes, she had completed advanced emergency response training and required every executive in her company to do the same. Most board members treated it as a formality. Danielle never had. She handed Evelyn the oxygen mask and guided her through the setup. Keep your hands steady. Speak to him even if he does not answer. Evelyn nodded. Her fear had changed shape. It was no longer fear of Caldwell. It was fear of failing someone who needed her. Danielle monitored Harold's pulse while Margaret held his hand. The paramedics are less than 2 minutes away, the younger attendant said. Caldwell stepped forward at last. I can take over. Danielle did not look up. Are you medically trained beyond basic first aid? He paused. I have department certification. Then help clear the aisle and keep passengers seated. The instruction was not disrespectful. It was practical. Still, Caldwell's jaw tightened. He was being assigned a role rather than commanding the room, and the distinction unsettled him. Danielle continued working, her voice low and even. Harold's eyes opened again. My wife, he whispered. She is right here, Danielle said. Margaret squeezed his hand. I am not going anywhere. A faint siren sounded beyond the aircraft door. The paramedics arrived through the jet bridge carrying equipment, and Danielle gave them a clear summary of Harold's condition, his reported symptoms, his medication history, and the timeline of his decline. One paramedic looked at her with surprise. Are you a doctor? No, Danielle said. I was prepared. They transferred Harold carefully onto a stretcher. As he passed, Margaret reached for Danielle's hand. You kept him with me. Danielle shook her head gently. You noticed something was wrong. That mattered. When the paramedics disappeared down the jet bridge, the cabin remained silent. Danielle stood slowly, smoothing her coat. The side of her face still carried the visible mark of what had happened earlier, but no one was looking at her with suspicion now. Caldwell cleared his throat and tried to recover the authority that had slipped away from him. The medical emergency does not change our original issue. Danielle turned toward him. No, she said. It reveals it. Evelyn looked from Caldwell to Danielle, then reached for the cabin interphone. I am contacting the captain, she said. Caldwell's expression hardened. Put that down. Evelyn held the receiver more firmly. No, officer. I should have done it sooner. Caldwell stared at the receiver in Evelyn's hand as though her refusal had shifted the entire cabin beneath his feet. For years, people had stepped aside when he spoke. Gate agents lowered their voices. Crew members avoided paperwork. Passengers learned quickly that challenging him only made the delay longer. Now a flight attendant he had intimidated more than once was standing between him and the control he expected. You are interfering with an active security matter, he said. Evelyn's face had gone pale, but she kept the receiver near her ear. I am reporting an incident involving a passenger, an officer, and a medical emergency. That is my responsibility. Caldwell took a slow breath. Your responsibility is to follow instructions. Danielle watched him carefully. His words were controlled, but the rhythm beneath them had changed. He was no longer certain the room belonged to him. The passengers could feel it too. Several phones remained raised. The businessman who had spoken earlier was now recording openly. Grant Hollis sat rigid beside the window, staring at his hands. What had begun with his complaint had grown beyond anything he could dismiss as a misunderstanding. Caldwell turned toward Danielle. Stand in the aisle and place your hands where I can see them. Danielle did not move. You still have not identified a lawful reason to detain me. You disrupted the cabin, resisted instructions, and interfered with security. A quiet voice came from across the aisle. She saved a man's life. Caldwell glanced toward the woman who had spoken. That does not erase prior conduct. Another passenger answered, what prior conduct? The question moved through the cabin like a current. Caldwell's expression hardened. He looked toward Evelyn. End the call. She pressed the receiver closer. Captain Reed, this is Evelyn in the forward cabin. I need you here immediately. Caldwell reached for his radio again. I am requesting support for removal of a non-compliant passenger. Danielle heard the words and felt something colder than fear. She recognized the strategy. Once the label entered the system, facts would have to fight their way back through reports, assumptions, and official language. A calm woman could become aggressive in a sentence. A valid question could become resistance. Silence could become guilt. She stood slowly, not because Caldwell had earned obedience, but because she wanted every camera to capture the truth clearly. "I am standing," she said. "I am not consenting to detention, and I am not leaving this aircraft without the captain present." Caldwell stepped into the aisle. "You do not set the terms." Danielle looked directly at him. "Neither do you." The cabin held its breath. Outside the windows, rain streaked across the glass while baggage carts moved beneath the wing, ordinary and distant, as though the world beyond the aircraft had no idea what was happening inside. Caldwell removed the handcuffs again. This time, the metallic click was loud enough to reach the rear rows. A young girl seated beside her mother covered her ears. Danielle noticed and lowered her voice. "Officer Caldwell, there is a child watching you. Then stop making this difficult. I have been asking you to check a boarding pass." His face tightened. "Turn around." Evelyn lowered the receiver. "The captain is coming." Caldwell did not look at her. "You may be removed from duty for this." Evelyn's hand trembled, but she answered, "Then I will explain why." The forward galley curtain shifted, and footsteps sounded beyond it. Caldwell moved closer to Danielle before anyone could enter, as though he needed to complete the scene before another authority could challenge him. He reached toward her wrist. Danielle stepped back once, keeping her hands visible. "Do not turn your mistake into another one." 2 additional airport officers appeared at the aircraft door. Both stopped when they saw the raised phones, the silent passengers, and the visible mark on Danielle's face. Caldwell spoke first. "She is refusing lawful removal." The older officer looked at Danielle, then at Evelyn. "What happened?" Caldwell answered before either woman could speak. "She caused a disturbance in first class." "That is not true," Evelyn said. Her voice cracked, then strengthened. Officer Caldwell refused to verify her seat, threatened her, and escalated the situation. Grant finally stood. His face was gray with shame. "I made the original complaint," he said. "I was wrong." Caldwell turned toward him in disbelief. Grant swallowed. "She did nothing. I saw someone I did not expect to see in this cabin, and I decided that meant she did not belong here." The confession hung in the air. Danielle felt no satisfaction. Only exhaustion. The older officer looked at Caldwell. "Did you verify the manifest?" Caldwell said nothing. Then the cockpit door opened, and Captain Marcus Reed stepped into the cabin. His eyes moved across the scene, from Evelyn's trembling hands to the officers in the aisle, then to Danielle. For one brief second, recognition flashed across his face. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. The entire first-class cabin went still. Marcus Reed did not step farther into the cabin. He simply stood beneath the soft cockpit light, one hand resting against the doorframe, his expression controlled but unmistakably alert. Danielle met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. It was not time. Not yet. Marcus understood. He had known Danielle for 11 years. First as the executive who approved the scholarship that allowed him to complete flight training, later as the owner who insisted that every employee, from baggage handlers to senior pilots, be held to the same standard of dignity. He also knew that when she became very still, she was not uncertain. She was deciding how much truth the room was ready to face. Caldwell looked between them. "You know this passenger?" Marcus moved his gaze to the officer. "I know that she is assigned to seat 2A, that the aircraft has not been released for departure, and that I was called because an incident occurred in my cabin." His tone was calm, but the authority in it was different from Caldwell's. It did not demand attention. It earned it. "She refused removal," Caldwell said. "On what grounds was she being removed?" Marcus asked. Caldwell's silence lasted 1 second too long. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere behind the first-class curtain, a seatbelt buckle struck an armrest with a small metallic sound. Danielle lowered herself back into her seat. The adrenaline that had carried her through Harold's emergency was beginning to fade, leaving a fine tremor in her fingers. She placed both hands in her lap so no one would see. For the first time since Caldwell approached her, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the moment. The humiliation had not disappeared because witnesses had spoken. The fear had not vanished because Marcus had arrived. Her body still remembered the sudden shock, the cold attention of strangers, and the terrible familiarity of being judged before being heard. She looked through the oval window. Beyond the wet glass, runway lights blurred into long ribbons of amber and white. When she was 15, she had watched similar lights from an airport gate while her mother stood beside a torn ticket and tried not to cry. Danielle had promised herself that one day she would build something better. She had built terminals, routes, jobs, and policies. Yet here she was, sitting inside her own company, carrying the same silence her mother had carried. A small voice came from across the aisle. "Ma'am." Danielle turned. The young girl who had covered her ears earlier stood beside her mother, holding out a folded tissue. She could not have been older than 8. "For your cheek," she said. Her mother looked embarrassed, as though afraid the gesture might be inappropriate, but Danielle accepted it gently. "Thank you." The girl studied her with open seriousness. "He should have listened to you." Danielle pressed the tissue lightly against her face. "Yes," she said. "He should have." The child returned to her seat, and the cabin became quiet again. Not the fearful silence from before. This silence was attentive. It held the weight of what people had seen and what they had failed to do. Evelyn stood near the galley with tears gathering in her eyes. "Miss Carter," she said carefully, repeating the name Marcus had used, "I am sorry I did not speak sooner." Danielle looked at her. "Why did you wait?" Evelyn swallowed. "Because I was afraid of him." Caldwell shifted. "That is absurd." Evelyn did not look away this time. "You threatened to report me last winter when I questioned how you removed a family from a flight. You told me people who caused trouble did not last long at this airport." The older responding officer turned toward Caldwell. "Is that true?" Caldwell's face changed, not with remorse, but calculation. Danielle saw it clearly. He was measuring the room, the witnesses, the cameras, and the authority gathering around him. Marcus stepped into the aisle. "Officer Caldwell, before anything else happens, you will review the boarding pass, the manifest, and the cabin recording." Caldwell lifted his chin. "I do not take orders from airline staff." Marcus glanced at Danielle, waiting. She removed the tissue from her cheek, folded it once, and placed it beside her boarding pass. Then she looked at Caldwell with a calmness that made the entire cabin lean toward her. "No," she said quietly. "But you are about to learn exactly whose airline this is." Danielle reached into the inside pocket of her charcoal coat and removed a slim black identification case. She did not open it immediately. She placed it on the armrest beside the folded tissue and the boarding pass, then looked around the cabin as though she wanted every witness to understand that the next few seconds would not change what had already happened. "Before I show you anything," she said, "I want the record to be clear." Caldwell crossed his arms. "The record is already clear." "No," Danielle replied. "The record says you received a complaint. It does not say you verified it. It says you ordered me to leave. It does not say you checked my ticket. It says I resisted. It does not say you ignored every person who told you I belonged here." The older responding officer lowered his gaze toward Caldwell's body camera. "Is your camera active?" he asked. Caldwell hesitated. "It should be." "That was not my question." The younger officer stepped closer and examined the small indicator light. "It is recording." A quiet release moved through the cabin, not relief exactly, but the sense that the truth had acquired another witness. Danielle opened the identification case. Inside was a silver executive credential bearing the Aurora Atlantic emblem, her photograph, and the words chair and principal owner. She held it where Caldwell could see. His eyes moved across the card once, then again. The color drained from his face so gradually that it seemed the cabin light itself was changing. Grant Hollis leaned into the aisle, his mouth slightly open. Evelyn closed her eyes for one brief second. Marcus remained still near the cockpit door. "My name is Danielle Carter," she said. "I founded Aurora Atlantic Airways 23 years ago. I own the controlling interest in this company, and I boarded today under my legal maiden name to review reports of discriminatory treatment on this route." Caldwell looked at Marcus. "You expect me to believe this?" Marcus answered without raising his voice. "I expect you to read the credential." Danielle returned the card to its case. "You had my name before you had my title. You had my ticket before you had my position. Neither was enough for you. Caldwell's expression tightened as he searched for a way back to familiar ground. Even company owners must follow security instructions. Correct, Danielle said. And officers must have a lawful basis for issuing them. The older officer turned toward Evelyn. Can you access the manifest? She nodded and lifted the tablet from the galley counter. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. Seat 2A is assigned to Danielle Carter. Identity verified at check-in. No security flags. No crew reports before Officer Caldwell boarded. The younger officer looked toward Grant. Did she threaten you? Grant shook his head. No, touch your belongings. No, attempt to enter a restricted area. No, Grant's voice weakened. She asked questions about the delay, and I assumed she should not be sitting here. The admission seemed smaller the second time, but uglier. Caldwell looked at the passengers holding their phones. Turn those devices off. This is an active investigation. No one moved. A woman near the window said, "They are evidence." Danielle studied Caldwell. She had expected surprise when he learned who she was. She had not expected understanding. Men who relied on authority rarely surrendered it in one moment. Still, she offered him a final path. Officer Caldwell, review the footage, acknowledge that your judgment was wrong, and cooperate with the responding officers. He stared at her credential case. So this was a setup. Danielle's eyes narrowed. You believe I forced you to ignore my boarding pass. You boarded under another name to test employees. I boarded under my own legal name to observe a system I am responsible for. Caldwell gave a bitter laugh. And now you will use your money to destroy my career. Danielle rose from her seat, slow and composed. Your career is not in danger because I have money. It is in danger because you believed I had none. The older officer stepped between them. Officer Caldwell, surrender your access badge and remain at the gate while we review the recording. Caldwell did not move. Marcus nodded toward the security camera. The footage is already being preserved. Evelyn looked at Danielle. I initiated the lock. For the first time, Danielle saw something stronger than fear in her face. Caldwell unclipped his airport badge and placed it in the older officer's hand. The small piece of metal made almost no sound. Yet in the silence of the cabin, it sounded like a door closing. The older officer carried Caldwell's badge toward the aircraft door while the younger officer asked him to step onto the jet bridge. Caldwell remained in the aisle for one final moment, looking from Danielle to the passengers who had recorded everything. The certainty that had shaped his face earlier was gone. In its place was something smaller and more exposed. Miss Carter, he said, I did not know who you were. Danielle held his gaze. That is the problem. No one spoke. Caldwell looked down, then followed the officers off the aircraft. The door remained open, and cool air from the terminal drifted into the cabin. It carried the faint smell of rain and coffee from the gate area. Danielle sat again, but the moment did not feel finished. Justice had begun, yet justice was not the same as humiliation returned in the opposite direction. She turned to Marcus. Delay departure until the statements are collected and every passenger who recorded the incident has a secure way to submit the footage. Marcus nodded. I will coordinate with operations. Also contact the hospital. I want an update on Harold Benton before this aircraft moves. Margaret had left with him, but her empty seat remained across the aisle, the blanket folded neatly where she had been sitting. Evelyn stood near the galley, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Danielle looked at her. Come sit down. Evelyn hesitated, then took the vacant jump seat near the forward door. Without the service counter between them, she looked less like a senior flight attendant and more like a tired woman who had spent years surviving one difficult shift at a time. I failed you, she said. Yes, Danielle replied. The honesty made Evelyn flinch, but Danielle continued. You also told the truth when it mattered, and that matters too. Evelyn lowered her eyes. I was afraid I would lose my job. Fear explains silence. It does not erase the harm silence allows. Evelyn nodded as tears slipped down her face. I understand. Danielle studied her for a moment. You will be removed from active duty during the investigation. Evelyn inhaled sharply but did not argue. However, I am not ending your employment today. You will have the opportunity to provide a complete statement, including every prior incident involving Caldwell. You will also enter retraining before you return to a cabin. Evelyn looked up. Why are you giving me another chance? Danielle glanced toward the little girl across the aisle, who was now coloring quietly beside her mother. Because accountability should create courage, not only fear. Grant Hollis stood slowly from his seat. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. Danielle turned toward him. His navy blazer no longer looked polished. It looked like a costume he had relied on too heavily. I judged you, he said. I made a complaint because I thought you did not fit here. I told myself I was protecting the flight, but I was protecting my own assumptions. Danielle let the confession settle. Will you say that in your official statement? Yes. Will you say it without mentioning that I own the airline? He hesitated, then understood. Yes. Danielle nodded once. Then begin there. A call came through the galley phone. Marcus answered, listened, and turned toward Danielle. The paramedics say Mr. Benton is stable. He is being taken to Mercy General for observation. The tension in Danielle's shoulders eased for the first time. Around the cabin, passengers exhaled quietly. The story had changed again. It was no longer only about what had been done to her. It was also about what she had chosen to do afterward. Marcus approached with a tablet. The regional director is on the line. He wants to know whether Caldwell should be banned from all Aurora Atlantic property. Danielle looked through the open aircraft door toward the terminal where the officer had disappeared. Place him on immediate suspension from airport access pending the independent investigation. Send the footage to his department, our legal team, and the Civilian Review Board. No private settlement. No quiet transfer. Marcus nodded. And if the findings confirm a pattern? Danielle folded the tissue the little girl had given her and placed it inside her identification case. Then he loses the position he used to harm people. She looked toward Evelyn, then Grant, then the passengers whose silence had finally broken. But make sure the report includes every person who spoke up today. Systems do not change because one powerful person is recognized. They change when ordinary people stop looking away. Outside, the rain began to lighten. A thin band of sunlight appeared beyond the terminal roof, touching the wet wing in gold. The cabin remained delayed, unsettled, and honest. For the first time that morning, Danielle felt that the airline she had promised her mother was beginning to exist. 3 weeks later, the morning sun stretched across the glass walls of Aurora Atlantic headquarters, turning the conference room floor pale gold. Danielle stood at the end of the long table with a printed report resting beneath her hand. The independent investigation had reviewed the cabin footage, passenger recordings, body camera video, and 7 earlier complaints connected to Ryan Caldwell. The pattern was clear. He had repeatedly treated suspicion as evidence, relied on intimidation, and targeted passengers who appeared out of place in spaces he believed belonged to someone else. His department terminated his employment, revoked his airport credentials, and referred the case to the Civilian Review Board. Aurora Atlantic permanently barred him from its property. There was no private agreement, no quiet transfer, and no carefully worded announcement designed to protect reputations. The company released the findings publicly and acknowledged its own failures. Danielle insisted on that part. Caldwell had made the choices, but a system of silence had allowed those choices to continue. Evelyn Brooks completed her investigation and accepted responsibility for waiting too long to speak. She spent 6 weeks away from active service, participated in passenger rights training, and helped create a new reporting channel that allowed crew members to document misconduct without approval from a supervisor. When she returned to work, she no longer wore the senior flight attendant pin. She had agreed to earn it again. Grant Hollis submitted a written statement that did not mention Danielle's ownership until the final page. He described his assumption plainly and admitted that he had confused personal discomfort with public danger. His words became part of the company's new bias training, not because they excused him, but because honest accountability could warn others before silence became harm. Harold Benton recovered and sent Danielle a handwritten letter from his home in Ohio. He thanked her for staying calm when everyone else froze. At the bottom, Margaret had added one sentence. You saw a person before you saw a problem. Danielle placed the letter in the same drawer where she kept her mother's old boarding pass, still torn through the middle after all those years. On the first Monday of the following month, Danielle returned to Gate 18. The same aircraft waited beyond the windows, its white fuselage bright beneath a clear sky. Near the boarding door, a new sign had been mounted at eye level. Every passenger enters with equal dignity. Employees passed it on their way to work. Travelers read it while holding coffee cups, carry-on bags, and restless children. Some barely noticed. Danielle noticed. Evelyn stood at the gate checking boarding passes under the supervision of a trainer. When she saw Danielle, she straightened. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter." Danielle handed her the pass. "Thank you, Evelyn." Their eyes met. There was no easy forgiveness in the exchange, but there was something steadier than forgiveness. There was responsibility carried forward. Inside the cabin, seat 2A waited beside the window. Danielle sat down and looked across the aisle at the place where Harold had fallen ill. The carpet had been cleaned. The lights were warm. The small camera above the galley remained in the same position, but now its presence felt different. It was no longer only a witness to failure. It was a reminder that truth mattered only when people were willing to act on it. As the aircraft pulled away from the gate, Danielle watched the terminal slide past the glass. She thought of her mother standing beneath fluorescent lights, apologizing for occupying a seat she had paid for. She thought of the child who had offered a tissue, the passengers who had finally raised their voices, and the employee who had chosen courage after fear. Kindness had not made Danielle weak. Her calm had not been surrender. She had protected a stranger, preserved the truth, and demanded justice without becoming cruel. Power had revealed who Caldwell was, but restraint had revealed who Danielle chose to remain. The plane lifted above the runway, and sunlight spread across the wing. Below, Gate 18 grew smaller, but the lesson did not. Dignity should never depend on a title, a uniform, a bank account, or the color of someone's skin. So what would you have done in that cabin before you knew who Danielle was?